Captain Xander Quirk had a knack for making bad decisions look like daring adventures. This one, however, was a new level of stupidity. The Whimsy, a ship that looked like it was held together by wishful thinking and duct tape, drifted into orbit around a comet with a name longer than Xander's attention span. Just another Tuesday in the cosmic neighborhood. The crew was gathered in the cockpit, where the smell of burnt coffee and desperation hung thick. "Why the hell are we here again?" grumbled Erla, the ship's engineer, who had the charm of a grizzly bear with a hangover. Her idea of a good time was fixing the ship while cursing its existence. "Because, Erla, we have the rare opportunity to witness a negotiation of galactic proportions," Xander said, flipping switches with more confidence than competence. "And because we're broke," added Finn, the ship's pilot and part-time pessimist. "So broke even a black hole wouldn't swallow us for spare change." Quirk ignored him. "It's a ritual site, a meeting place for alien races to hash out territorial rights in subspace. And we're invited to this shindig?" Erla asked, her eyebrow arched enough to make Spock jealous. "Not exactly," Quirk admitted, tapping the communicator with a hope bordering on delusion. "But when has that stopped us?" The screen fizzled to life, broadcasting the image of an alien with more eyes than a paranoid god. Its voice was like nails on a chalkboard, assuming chalkboards were still a thing. "Welcome, humans of the Whimsy," it said, with a pause that suggested even the alien couldn't believe they were called that. "State your business." "We're here to observe," Xander said with a smile that was 1 part used car salesman, 2 parts "please don't vaporize us." "Observe what?" the alien asked, with a suspicion that was practically tangible. "The beauty of interspecies cooperation," Xander lied like a teenager caught sneaking in after curfew. The alien squinted, a feat impressive given its multitude of eyes. "Very well, but remember humans are forbidden from reproducing." The silence was so thick it could have been cut with a rusty space knife. "Reproducing? You mean like?" Finn made a suggestive gesture that was both obscene and anatomically questionable. "Yes," the alien confirmed, its distaste clear even through the static. "Your species' unpredictability is a liability." "Well, ain't that a kick in the reproductive organs?" Erla muttered, with a half-smile that suggested she'd been kicked there a few times before. "Our species might be unpredictable, but at least we've got great music," Finn offered, with the enthusiasm of a man who knew he was grasping at straws. "And sarcasm," Erla added. "We're really good at sarcasm." The alien's eyes narrowed, an impressive sight that made Xander glad he only had to deal with 2. "Observe but do not interfere, or reproduce." With that, the screen went dark, leaving the crew in a silence only broken by the hum of the ship, which sounded like a dying cat trying to sing opera. "Well," Xander said, clapping his hands together. "This should be interesting." "Interesting is one word for it," Finn mumbled, already plotting an escape route in his head. "Idiotic might be another." "You say idiotic, I say adventurous," Xander replied with the air of a man who'd never heard of a thesaurus. "Speaking of which, what's the plan?" Erla asked, folding her arms like a bouncer ready to toss out the riffraff. "The plan is..." Xander hesitated, looking more like a deer in headlights than a daring captain. "To not get kicked out of the universe's weirdest peace conference," Finn suggested, with the tone of a man who knew that plan sounded better in his head. "Exactly," Xander said, with the enthusiasm of a man who'd just been handed a map to nowhere. "Let's mingle with the galaxy's finest and keep our species' future secured." Erla snorted. "Hope you packed your charm." "And by charm I mean bribes. And maybe a shovel to dig our own graves." As they prepared to disembark, Xander had a fleeting thought that maybe, just maybe, they were in over their heads. Then again, he always did love a good underdog story, especially when he was the underdog. Or maybe just a dog. "Let's show these aliens what humans are made of," Xander declared, with the bravado of a man who often forgot humans were mostly water and poor decisions. As they descended to the comet's surface, the cold bit into them with all the hospitality of a loan shark on collection day. The ritual site was an alien Stonehenge on a cosmic acid trip, towering structures that defied physics, laws, and good taste. Colorful lights danced around them, an alien disco in full swing. Now that, Xander said, is a sight. I've seen better at a second-rate strip club, Erla remarked, unimpressed. With fewer tentacles. Focus, people, Xander said, looking over the gathering crowd of aliens that seemed more interested in their own bizarre rituals than the interloping humans. We need to find out who's in charge here, and maybe why they think humans shouldn't reproduce, Finn added, casting a wary eye on a particularly squishy-looking alien. Do we really want to know? Erla asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Knowing our luck, it's something like too many reality shows, or our penchant for blowing things up, Finn suggested, flashing a grin that would make a dentist wince. Hey, when you put it like that, maybe they have a point, Xander admitted, scratching his chin with the philosophical depth of a kiddie pool. All right, let's mingle. But remember, no sudden movements. Or propositions. As they moved through the crowd, it became glaringly obvious that humans were about as welcome as vegans at a barbecue. The aliens gave them a wide berth, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. Feels like high school all over again, Finn muttered, dodging a tentacle that looked too friendly for comfort. Least we're not getting shoved in lockers, Erla replied, stepping around a puddle of what she hoped was water. Speak for yourself, Xander said as he navigated through the crowd with the grace of a drunk giraffe. We're here to make a statement. What kind? We exist, deal with it, Finn asked, raising an eyebrow. Pretty much, Xander confirmed, eyes scanning for any sign of leadership among the chaos. Ah, there we are. He pointed to a raised platform where an alien that resembled a giant, sentient traffic cone was holding court. Think that's the head honcho? Erla asked, her skepticism as loud as her voice. Only one way to find out, Xander said, with a shrug that suggested he'd never learned the meaning of subtlety. As they approached, the traffic cone alien turned its attention to them. Its voice boomed, echoing across the site. Humans, what is the meaning of your intrusion? We're here to observe, Xander said, with all the conviction of a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And maybe discuss this whole no reproducing thing, Finn added with a smile that was more apology than charm. The alien considered them, its expression unreadable. You humans are an unpredictable breed. Your existence is problematic. We prefer dynamic, Xander said, with a grin that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't ignore. Your chaos disrupts the order, the alien continued, as if Xander was a particularly dense student. We have rules. Rules are meant to be bent, Erla chimed in, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Or broken, depending on how much fun you're having. The alien's eyes narrowed, an impressive feat considering it didn't have any eyes. You are forbidden from reproducing until further notice. So, you're condemning our species to a slow extinction? Finn asked, with the tone of a man who didn't understand why he'd ordered the spicy alien tacos. We need to keep the peace, the alien replied, as if it were explaining the concept of gravity to a fish. And you're too unpredictable. That's what makes us interesting, Xander argued, waving his arms in what he hoped was a compelling manner. Our unpredictability is our strength, or our downfall, Erla added, with the air of someone who'd seen more than her fair share of human stupidity. Which is it? The alien asked, its curiosity piqued. Both, Xander admitted with a shrug that suggested he was used to playing both sides, but mostly strength. This meeting is adjourned, the alien declared with a finality that Xander found both comforting and disconcerting. Return to your ship and await further instructions. Well, that went well, Finn said as they retreated with the speed of a cat avoiding a bath. We're not dead. I'll take that as a win, Xander replied, with a confidence that suggested he frequently mistook survival for victory. As they boarded the Whimsy, the weight of the comet's decree hung over them like a cosmic guillotine. What now? Erla asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and resignation. Now, Xander said, with the determination of a man who's just realized he's neck-deep in trouble, we figure out how to change the galaxy's mind. or at least make it think twice before banning us from existing. And if we can't, Finn asked, with the fatalism of a man who's misplaced his optimism. Then we go out with a bang, Xander said, with a grin that suggested he'd never met an explosion he didn't like. Or a whimper, Erla added, rolling her eyes, but preferably a bang. As the ship's engines roared to life, the crew of the Whimsy prepared for yet another adventure, the kind that promised mischief, mayhem, and maybe a little madness. Just another day in the life of Captain Xander Quirk and his band of misfits. The end of humanity's lineage loomed, but in the vastness of space, they were determined to make a hell of a last stand. The Whimsy's engine hummed a death rattle that only slightly worried its crew. Captain Xander Quirk, balancing precariously on the edge of optimism and delusion, sat at the helm, plotting a course toward the Galactic Council's makeshift headquarters at the Comet's core. A joyful place as any to have humanity's reproductive rights judged by beings that resembled modern art experiments gone wrong. Erla clanked in, rubbing machine grease off her hands with a rag that might have once been a shirt. "Great news, Cap," she grunted. "The ship's still only mostly broken." "Music to my ears, Erla," Xander replied, buckling himself into the pilot's seat. "Tinker, any chance you can make us look less like trespassing buffoons and more like dignified ambassadors?" Tinker, the tech-savvy engineer whose hobbies included making improbable tech work and hating everyone, didn't look up from his console. "I can make us blink pretty lights, Xander, like strapping a disco ball to a garbage truck." "But sure, why not?" "Inspiring as ever," Finn mumbled, double-checking the ship's feeble life support systems. "If we crash and burn, at least we'll do it with flair." "That's the spirit," Xander said, slapping the control panel. The ship lurched, which in the Whimsy's terms meant it was probably working. As they approached the Comet's center, Lilo, their sarcastic diplomat, appeared from the back, a smirk curving her lips. "They're expecting us, right?" "Depends on your definition of expecting," Xander replied, adjusting his hat with a flourish. "I'd say they're more like reluctantly acknowledging our existence." "Ah," Lilo nodded, her voice dripping with hunted irony. "Nothing like being the universe's least desired houseguest." The Comet's core shimmered ahead, a kaleidoscope of alien architecture. The Galactic Council had set up shop in a structure that looked like a cathedral designed by someone on a cocktail of hallucinogens. Spires twisted into each other, glowing with an unsettlingly organic pulse. "Reminds me of my ex's interior decorating," Finn said, shaking his head. "All it needs is a lava lamp and a bad idea." "You dated someone with taste," Erla quipped. "How unexpected." Xander guided the Whimsy into an unoccupied docking bay which was suspiciously more available than it should have been. "Imagine," he said, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "All of this done to keep us from getting frisky." "Frisky? You make it sound like we're plotting to host a cosmic orgy," Lilo said, her laughter barely contained. "Well, some of these aliens might be into that," Finn suggested, eyeing a particularly gelatinous life form slithering past the view screen. "Focus, people," Xander said, trying and failing to pull off his best captainly tone. "Let's present ourselves as the charming, delightful species we are." "Charming as a slap to the face," Tinker muttered. The docking bay doors opened with a hiss, a sign they hadn't been locked in yet. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and the kind of expectation that usually preceded a riot or an awkward family dinner. The council chamber was a round room filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy, each one more bizarre than the last. The sight could only be described as a menagerie of nightmares. "Let's charm their pants off," Xander whispered, only slightly aware that most of these beings didn't wear pants. The council's head honcho, a creature with too many limbs and not enough torso, sat on a throne-like structure at the center. "Humans," it began, its voice a series of clicks and pops translated by their communicators into something resembling speech. "What brings you to our sacred council?" "Well, we were in the neighborhood," Xander offered, "and thought we'd drop by to discuss this whole no-reproducing thing." A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber, or at least that's what Xander hoped it was. Lilo stepped forward, clearing her throat. "We understand your concerns. Humanities. Exuberance can be overwhelming. Exuberance is one word for it," Erla said under her breath. "But," Lilo continued, her voice smooth as silk, "human unpredictability is part of what makes us unique. It's what helped us survive. And occasionally destroy things," Finn added helpfully. The head of the council surveyed them with something akin to bemusement. "Your unpredictability leads to chaos. We seek balance, and we seek understanding," Lilo countered, her charm dialed up to 11. "Surely that's worth a conversation." The council members exchanged looks, some of them with more eyes than others. "Perhaps a demonstration," the head suggested, a glint of mischief in its multiple pupils. Xander exchanged a glance with his crew. This could go terribly wrong, or just terribly. But when had that ever stopped them? "Demonstration it is," Xander said, clapping his hands together. "Prepare to be amazed by human ingenuity." Erla groaned. "I hate it when he says that." The council chamber transformed into a stage, lights dimming to focus on the humans, a spotlight that felt more like an interrogation than a showcase. Tinker began fiddling with a portable communicator, intending to broadcast a message of human accomplishments, while Finn, ever the reluctant performer, started narrating their many feats. "We've climbed mountains, crossed oceans, and occasionally survived our own cooking," Finn said, his voice echoing with exaggerated grandeur. "And developed sarcasm as a defense mechanism," Erla added, not letting the moment pass without her signature wit. The council watched, their expressions unreadable, caught somewhere between confusion and interest. As the slideshow of humanity's questionable achievements flickered on the screen, an alien toward the back, a sentient bush with a face only a mother could love, burst into what could only be interpreted as laughter. Xander seized the moment. "See, laughter, we bring joy to the universe." The head of the council raised a limb, silencing the room. "We are amused," it said, "but amusement does not alter the decree." "Then what will?" Lilo asked, her voice like velvet over steel. The council leaned in, conspiratorial. "Show us something that does not disrupt but unites." A beat of silence passed, thick like the tension before a bar fight. Xander scratched his head, weighing the council's cryptic demand. "Unites, huh? Well, have you ever heard of music?" A murmur swirled through the chamber, a bizarre symphony of clicks, hisses, and guttural growls. "Music?" the head of the council inquired, perplexed. "Right. Humanity's universal language," Xander said, eyes sparkling with the enthusiasm of a salesman closing a deal. "Even if you can't stand to hear us talk, maybe you'll enjoy what we sing." Tinker tapped into the communicator's audio database, scrolling through centuries of Earth's finest, and probably some of its worst, musical accomplishments. "Got it," he announced. "Let's try something universal." The first notes of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony began to play, the sound reverberating through the chamber. The music swelled, filling the room with a richness that seemed to transcend the oft-crass reality of being human. Heads tilted, tentacles waved. Appendages of all kinds swayed to the rhythm, a motley crew under the spell of classical genius. "See," Xander said, grinning. "Brings us all together, doesn't it?" "Almost like a cosmic kumbaya," Lilo whispered, unable to resist a smirk. The music reached its crescendo, and as the last notes faded, a hush fell over the room, a contemplative silence, as if the council pondered the profundity of what it had just witnessed. The council's head nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed to take considerable effort, given its physiology. "We are." "Impressed," it admitted, a hint of reluctance in its tone. "Perhaps there is more to you than chaos." "We're full of surprises," Finn said, shrugging in that way that suggested he was just as surprised as they were. "Then perhaps," the head continued, "a reassessment is warranted." Xander couldn't help but shoot a triumphant glance at his crew. "See, told you it'd work out." Erla rolled her eyes. "Don't start planning the victory parade just yet, Cap." But for the first time in a long time, a sliver of hope flickered amidst the cynical banter. Maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to turn the tide, or at least gotten the universe to consider not kicking them out entirely. As the Whimsy's crew made their exit, The council's murmurs followed them, a blend of curiosity and grudging admiration. Humanity's place in the universe was far from secure, but for now they had music, laughter, and a chance to prove themselves. As they reached the ship, Finn let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Think they'll let us stick around?" "Depends on whether they find out about our reality shows," Erla said, her voice laced with dark amusement. "Or our cooking," Tinker added. Xander paused at the ship's ramp, the weight of their mission still heavy but not insurmountable. "One step at a time, folks, one step at a time." The comet glittered in the distance, a reminder of the vast unknown that awaited. But that was all right. After all, the best adventures were the ones no one saw coming. Just another day for Xander Quirk and his band of misfit ambassadors. The Whimsy's engine wheezed like a dying rhinoceros as it settled into orbit around the comet. If you listened closely, you might hear it whispering sweet nothings, promising to explode at the least convenient moment. Captain Xander Quirk, ever the optimist, called it character building. The rest of the crew just hoped it wouldn't end in a fiery display of character disassembly. While the crew deliberated their next move, Tinker was down in the bowels of the ship, elbows deep in wires and circuits, muttering curses that would make a sailor blush. Tinker didn't love people, but he did love machines. They rarely talked back, though this one seemed keen on expressing its displeasure with the occasional spark to his face. "Tinker, you down there?" Xander's voice crackled over the intercom like a bad radio host trying too hard. "No, it's the Tooth Fairy," Tinker replied, wiping his greasy hands on his pants. "What's up?" "We're considering a field trip. Check out that alien tech on the comet. Could use the company of someone who doesn't talk much. Because nothing screams safe like poking ancient alien artifacts," Tinker grumbled, knowing full well he'd be the first to jump at the chance. Curiosity was his Achilles heel. Well, that, and a complete lack of regard for potentially lethal consequences. "Exactly. Get your gear, we're going digging." Minutes later, Tinker joined Xander, Erla, Lilo, and Finn in the airlock, equipped with an assortment of tools that would make any handyman jealous. The comet awaited, its surface a mingling of ice and rock, dotted with structures that hinted at civilizations long gone, or just aliens with really bad taste in architecture. "Ever get the feeling we're not supposed to be here?" Finn asked, squinting at a particularly menacing spire. "Like a vegan at a steakhouse," Lilo replied, examining the alien ruins with a diplomat's practiced eye, which was currently set to "Why the hell am I here?" They descended onto the comet, the ground crunching underfoot like overcooked lasagna. Tinker, rubbing his hands together like a kid in a candy store, approached the nearest piece of tech, a console embedded in the ice. "You think this thing still works?" Xander asked, peering over Tinker's shoulder with the enthusiasm of someone who knows absolutely nothing about what they're looking at. Tinker snorted. "Best case scenario, it flickers on. Worst case, it kills us all. I'm game." Erla rolled her eyes. "That's your idea of worst case." "Live a little," Tinker shot back, already engrossed in the device. He began fiddling with the controls, which were covered in alien symbols that could mean anything from power on to incinerate. With a satisfying click, the console hummed to life. Or maybe it was a death rattle. Hard to tell with alien tech. The ground beneath them vibrated ominously, as if the comet itself was waking up and wasn't happy about visitors. What did you do?" Finn asked, inching backwards, ready to bolt at the first sign of chaos. "Activated it," Tinker said, as if stating the obvious. Didn't think it'd actually work. The ancient machinery around them began to whir and click, lights flickering on in a sequence that suggested something big was about to happen. Probably nothing good, knowing their luck. "Well, we've officially overstayed our welcome," Lilo commented dryly, watching as a towering structure in the distance began to glow. Xander scratched his head, a little too leisurely given the circumstances. "Maybe it's a welcome beacon, or a prepare-to-die signal," Erla replied, not one to sugarcoat. As if on cue, a beam of energy shot into the sky, splitting into a dazzling array of colors. It was beautiful, in the way fireworks are beautiful when you're standing a little too close and the sparks are hot on your face. "Anyone else feel like we just rang a really big doorbell?" Finn asked, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "Let's hope the neighbors are friendly," Xander replied, though the universe's track record suggested otherwise. Back at the council chamber, the alien representatives were thrown into a tizzy. The beam had caught everyone's attention and the humans were squarely in the spotlight, though this time it was more of a "what the hell did you just do" glare. The head of the council was less amused than before, its many eyes narrowing at the humans. "Explain yourselves," it demanded, its voice resonating with authority and more than a hint of irritation. "We, found this neat piece of tech," Xander began, trying to sound casual, "and it seemed like a good idea to turn it on. Like a toddler with a new toy," Erla muttered, her eyes rolling so hard they could orbit the comet. "Unscheduled activation of ancient technology is forbidden," the council head said, the words a warning that was hard to miss. "Hey, in our defense, it was very shiny," Finn offered, his attempt at humor falling flat. "Humans have an affinity for pressing buttons," Lilo added. "It's practically a biological imperative." The council mumbled among themselves, the universal sound of disapproval and barely contained panic. Xander, sensing they were teetering on the edge of a diplomatic incident, decided to lean into the chaos. "Look, the beam thing was an accident, but maybe it's not all bad. Could be a great opportunity to learn more about these ruins, huh? Or it could be an intergalactic distress signal," Erla pointed out, ever the realist. "Either way, it's a conversation starter," Xander said, flashing a grin that screamed, "Please don't kill us." The head of the council sighed, a sound that was unsettlingly similar to nails on a chalkboard. "We will discuss the implications of your actions. Remain here." "Sounds like a plan," Lilo said, her sarcasm dialed up to 11. "We'll just wait here while you decide if we're more trouble than we're worth." As the council deliberated, the crew of the Whimsy found themselves at a loose end, gathered on the comet under the now-dormant beam of light. "Anyone else thinking we might have overdone it?" Finn asked, staring up at the alien sky. "Only every second of every day," Erla replied, her voice tinged with the kind of weariness that comes from years of cleaning up other people's messes. "What's our backup plan if this all goes sideways?" "Run like hell," Xander suggested, with the air of someone who's gotten away with that more often than he'd like to admit. "We need something better than running," Lilo interjected, her mind already churning through contingencies. "We need leverage," Tinker, who had been suspiciously quiet, piped up. "There might be something. That beam, whatever it is, could be linked to something more. We just need to find out what. And pray it doesn't explode in our faces," Finn added, optimism not exactly his strong suit. "Exactly," Tinker said with a nod, already lost in thought. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden crackle from the Whimsy's communicator. "Council's calling," Xander said, answering the hail. The council's head appeared on their screen, looking less than pleased. "We have decided," it announced. "You will assist in deactivating the technology you have awakened. Until then, your presence here will remain. Under review. See." "Cooperation," Xander said, giving his crew a thumbs-up that was met with a chorus of groans. "More like probation," Lilo muttered under her breath. The crew sprang into action, or at least staggered with purpose. They returned to the site of their unintended light show, with Tinker analyzing the console like a detective at a crime scene. "Think you can reverse whatever you did?" Xander asked, hovering like a concerned parent. "Possibly," Tinker said, scratching his head. "If I knew what I did in the first place." "Your optimism is contagious," Erla said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I aim to please," Tinker shot back, adjusting wires and hoping he didn't accidentally trigger an apocalypse. Again. As Tinker worked, the council's representatives hovered nearby, their alien eyes watching with a mix of curiosity and caution. The humans worked in a tense silence, broken only by the occasional mutterings of "this should do it" and "please don't blow up." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tinker stepped back. "All right, try it now." Xander nodded, wincing slightly as he hit the activation switch. The console whirred, the lights flickered, and then, blessedly, began to shut down, the beam of light receding back into the structure. "See. All fixed," Xander said, grinning at the council's delegation like a kid who'd just put the lid back on the cookie jar. The council head tilted its head, a gesture that spoke volumes. "You have undone your mistake. For now, your presence remains tolerated." "Nothing like tolerance to make you feel welcome," Finn remarked, glancing at the imposing alien structures around them. As they made their way back to the Whimsy, the crew felt the weight of the council's eyes on them. The road to redemption was long, but they'd taken the first step, or at least avoided falling into a pit. "Think they'll let us stick around now?" Finn asked, ever the pessimist. "Hard to say," Lilo replied, "but we've shown we can clean up our messes. Even if we make them first. And that, my friends, is the essence of being human," Xander said, slapping Finn on the back. "Making things worse, then slightly better." As the Whimsy prepared for launch, they all knew the real work was just beginning. But at least they'd left an impression, an unpredictable, chaotic, and vaguely dangerous impression, but an impression nonetheless. And for Xander and his crew, that was a start. The council's chamber, a place that combined the warmth of an icebox with the charm of a bureaucratic dungeon, was abuzz with activity. The Intergalactic Committee, an eclectic mix of multi-limbed, multi-eyed, and multi-attituded beings, was in a frenzy. All thanks to the humans, whose knack for pressing buttons they shouldn't was legendary. Inside the chamber, Xander Quirk stood with his crew, looking like a bunch of schoolchildren caught with a slingshot in a broken window. The council head, a creature with more eyes than a spider on steroids, regarded them with the kind of disdain reserved for gum on a shoe. "So, about that big beam," Xander began, flashing a smile that could melt glaciers, or at least try. "We're really sorry about that. We just wanted to see how it worked. Curiosity killed the cat," the council head replied, its voice a mix of gravel and disdain. "And in this case might kill a lot more." "Yeah, but satisfaction brought it back," Xander shot back, trying to twist the old Earth saying to his advantage. "Didn't quite work, judging by the council's collective glare." Lilo, ever the diplomat, stepped forward. "We understand this is a ritual site and we respect that. We just got a bit overzealous." "Overzealous is firing a few rounds in the air," Finn muttered under his breath. "We practically nuked the neighborhood." Erla elbowed him in the ribs, her expression suggesting she was about 2 seconds away from strangling him. Maybe not the best time for sarcasm. The council, meanwhile, seemed to be communicating telepathically, or maybe just glaring in unison. Hard to tell with alien politics. Finally, the head spoke again. "Your presence here complicates delicate negotiations. The beam is a distress signal, and now other factions may arrive. This cannot continue." "Great," Tinker whispered to Lilo. "We might have started an intergalactic block party and were not invited." Lilo ignored him, focusing on the council head. "We can help manage the situation. We could deactivate the beam for good, maybe even improve security measures. That's what we do best, right?" She added a chuckle, though it came out more like a nervous hiccup. "Yeah," Xander chimed in. "We're like the universe's janitors. Spilled milk. We wipe it up, except, with more explosions. Your methods are unorthodox," the council head replied, using a tone that suggested unorthodox was not a compliment. "You have until the next cycle to resolve this situation." "Tick-tock," Finn murmured, eyes rolling toward the ceiling, as if expecting a countdown clock to appear. "Right, until the next cycle," Xander said, breezy as summer sky. "How long's a cycle again?" The council's many eyes blinked in sequence, an unnerving sight. "Approximately 3 of your Earth hours." "Plenty of time," Tinker said, sounding more confident than he should, considering their track record. As they were escorted out, Erla whispered to Xander, "You do realize we're flying by the seat of our pants, right?" "Hey, at least we're flying," Xander replied. "This is character building." "You're gonna character build us right into an early grave," Lilo muttered. Back at the Whimsy, The crew gathered in the cramped mess hall, which occasionally doubled as their crisis room, triple as their sleeping quarters, and quadruple as the place where Tinker tested questionable gadgets. "So," Xander clapped his hands together, "we need a plan." "Yeah, a plan that doesn't involve pressing more alien buttons," Finn said, arms crossed like a stubborn child. "Agreed," Lilo said, pacing in the limited space. "We need to figure out how to shut down that signal for good. Tinker, any bright ideas?" Tinker scratched his chin, grease smudging his cheek. "The console I tinkered with. There were subroutines, layers of them. If we can access the core program, we might be able to shut it down permanently. Or it might blow us all to hell," Finn quipped, ever the optimist. "Isn't that always the risk?" Tinker replied with a shrug, as if playing Russian roulette with alien tech was just another Tuesday. Urla leaned against the wall, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Okay, so we need to get back to the console, but we can't be seen messing with it again." Lilo nodded. "We need a distraction, something that draws attention away from us but doesn't make things worse." "How about I give a speech?" Xander suggested with a grin that said he thought he was joking. Urla raised an eyebrow. "You mean make things worse on purpose?" "Exactly," Xander said, not missing a beat. "We need the council's eyes on something else. I can play the fool while you guys work your magic." "Playing the fool?" Finn snorted. "That'll be a real stretch for you." Xander chose to ignore him. "Lilo, can you handle the council in my absence? Stall them with diplomatic jargon or something. Talk until they want to strangle me." "On it," Lilo said, cracking her knuckles like a heavyweight preparing for a title match. "Right, let's do this," Xander said, clapping his hands again. The sound echoed through the mess hall, a rallying cry of sorts, or maybe just an awkward attempt at motivation. As the crew split up, Xander made his way back to the council chamber, his mind racing with half-baked ideas and witty one-liners that might keep the aliens entertained, or at least confused, long enough for his team to fix their little interstellar oopsie. He entered the chamber with a flourish, arms wide like a magician, revealing his greatest trick. "Ladies, gentlemen, and multi-gendered beings of the council, I stand before you with a humble request." The council head looked less than impressed. "And what request is that?" Xander paused, realizing he hadn't thought this far ahead. "A song and dance number." The council head's eyes narrowed, but Xander pressed on. "We humans have this tradition, you see. A peace offering of sorts. I'd like to share it with you." "Captain, this is highly irregular," the council head said, but there was a flicker of interest, perhaps just curiosity, among the other members. "Please indulge me," Xander said, pouring on the charm he usually reserved for getting out of parking tickets. "It'll be a cultural exchange. You share your wisdom, we share our peculiar talents." Back with the whimsy crew, Lilo was stalling like her life depended on it, which it probably did. "So, about the negotiations," she said to a council member, who looked slightly less hostile than the others. "Have you considered the strategic implications of forming an alliance with Earth?" "What do you mean?" the alien asked, swirling its gelatinous form in a pattern that suggested mild interest. Lilo was in her element, spinning tales, weaving words like a master storyteller or a politician. "Well, Earth may be small, but we're scrappy. We've got resources, innovation, and the kind of optimism that borders on insanity. Not to mention, we make excellent allies in a pinch." Meanwhile, Tinker and Urla were back at the console, armed with a toolkit that looked like it had been looted from a scrapyard. Tinker was knee-deep in wires and circuits, his tongue sticking out in concentration. "All right, let's see if we can shut this thing down without blowing it up." "Or us," Urla added, keeping watch. As Tinker worked, the console flickered ominously, but he seemed to be making progress. "Almost there," he muttered, soldering a connection that looked like it was held together with hope and dreams. Back at the chamber, Xander was in full swing, performing a rendition of Earth classics that ranged from the sublime to the ridiculous. The council was, well, it was hard to tell with alien expressions, but they weren't throwing him out, which he took as a good sign. Finally, Tinker managed to access the core program. "All right, I'm in." Now let's shut this baby down. The console let out a low hum, the lights dimming as Tinker entered the final sequence. The beam, the troublesome, spectacular beam, faded away into nothingness. "We did it," Tinker said, incredulous. "We actually did it." Erla let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Let's hope Xander's still alive to hear about it. Back at the chamber, Xander was wrapping up his performance with a bow. Thank you, you've been a wonderful audience." The council head, looking somewhat amused or maybe just confused, nodded. "Your performance was unexpected." "That's what we do best," Xander said, his grin wide and genuine. "We surprise." As they regrouped on the whimsy, exhaustion settled over them like a heavy fog. But they'd done it, avoided catastrophe for now. The road ahead was uncertain, but for once, they'd managed to turn their chaos into something like progress. "So," Finn said as they prepared to leave the comet behind, "what's next?" "Hopefully," Xander replied, "something with fewer buttons." And with that, the whimsy soared into the stars, leaving behind a comet, a council, and a whole lot of diplomatic confusion. Just another day in the universe for Xander Quirk and his crew. The whimsy drifted through the ink of space like a drunken firefly, and the crew was about as coherent. They'd barely left the comet behind when things went sideways. Or maybe they were already sideways, and this was just another loop on the roller coaster. Either way, a rival alien faction, apparently eager to join the intergalactic circus, had decided it was the perfect time to launch a subspace attack. Finn looked at the display where blinking lights and ominous warnings were screaming for attention. "Looks like someone wants to crash our party," he quipped, leaning back in his chair as if he were watching a fireworks show instead of impending doom. "Great," Tinker muttered, fiddling with his toolkit as if it might magically produce a solution. "Just what we needed." "More guests and less cake. Can we focus?" Erla snapped, the voice of reason in a sea of insanity. "If they breach the hull, we're cosmic dust." "Thanks for the motivational speech," Finn shot back, really feeling the inspiration now. Captain Xander Quirk, ever the optimist, tried to rally his troops. "All right, team, this is just another challenge. You know, character-building stuff." "Character building's gonna get us killed," Erla grumbled, fingers flying over the controls as she tried to bring up the ship's pathetic defensive systems. "And if it doesn't, I might." The whimsy's engine, wheezing like a geriatric rhinoceros, decided now was the perfect time to throw a tantrum. The ship shuddered violently, lights flickering like a disco on the fritz. "Hold her together, old girl," Xander murmured, patting the console as if the ship might take comfort from his touch. "We've got one more show to put on." "More like the grand finale," Finn said, bracing himself as the ship took another hit. "And we've run out of fireworks." Lilo, who had been trying to negotiate over the communicator, turned back from the static-filled screen. "The council's blaming us for this," she said, her voice heavy with disbelief. "Apparently we're the scapegoats." "Of course we are," Tinker said, shaking his head. "We're the humans. We're always the problem, even when we're just trying to fix things. Or break them," Finn added with a wry grin. "We're versatile like that." "We need a plan," Xander said, sounding more desperate than decisive. The weight of leadership was pressing down, and for once his charm felt like a thin veneer over a chasm of trouble. "How about surrender?" Finn suggested. "Let them throw us in an alien jail. Might be safer than staying here." Erla rolled her eyes. "Your optimism is blinding, Finn, truly." "Thanks, I aim to inspire," Finn replied, grinning like a fool. Amidst the chaos, the ship's systems let out a mournful wail and the lights dimmed further. The aliens were closing in, and the whimsy was about as defensible as a paper bag in a monsoon. "I hope you've got a trick up your sleeve, Captain," Lilo said, her voice tight. "Tricks, no. Sleeves, yes," Xander replied, trying to keep the mood light. "But maybe we can improvise." "Never thought I'd hear you say that," Tinker quipped, wires still sparking around him. "Improvise usually means kaboom." "Then let's avoid kaboom," Xander said, taking the helm. "Lilo, keep negotiating. Finn, man the weapons. Erla, Tinker, get ready for whatever comes next." As they prepared for the inevitable, the ship shuddered again, and Xander could feel the oppressive weight of this darkest hour. The rival faction was relentless, and the Council's disdain was palpable even from light years away. "We're in the wrong movie," Finn muttered, hands flying over the weapons panel. "This is more horror than sci-fi." "Just shoot straight," Erla said, teeth clenched. "That's all I ask. And if we make it through this," Xander added, "drinks are on me." "Assuming we still have a ship," Tinker pointed out, welding a panel back into place. "Or a planet to land on." The Whimsy, battered and bruised, did her best to evade the enemy fire, but with every shuddering impact it was clear they were outmatched. Each hit was like a punch to the gut, and the reality of their situation was sinking in. "Brace yourselves," Xander shouted as another wave of energy crashed into them. "This might get rough." "Rough?" Finn asked, eyebrows raising. "This is a full-blown crash course in how to die in Space 101. The ship lurched and the crew held on for dear life. But all the holding in the universe wouldn't stop what came next. A final hit sent the Whimsy spinning, alarms blaring, systems failing. "Get ready," Xander called out over the chaos. But before anyone could react, the screen went dark, the noise ceased, and silence enveloped them. When the lights flickered back on, Xander found himself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. The room was cold, clinical, and very much an alien cell. It seemed the rivals had not only attacked but succeeded in capturing him. "Well, this is cozy," Xander muttered to himself, testing the chains that bound him. They didn't budge. He wasn't alone for long. The door slid open, revealing a guard who looked about as friendly as a rattlesnake with a migraine. The guard gestured, and Xander was unceremoniously hauled to his feet and dragged out of the cell. "Could have just asked," Xander grumbled as he was led down a corridor that oozed bureaucracy and bad intentions. Back on the Whimsy, the remaining crew members were in a state of semi-controlled panic. The ship was adrift, the captain was gone, and their situation had gone from bad to space opera tragedy in record time. "Where's Xander?" Lilo asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Alien hospitality," Tinker replied dryly, attempting to regain control of the ship's systems. "They've got him. Damn it," Erla cursed, slamming a fist against the console. "We can't leave him." "As much as I'd love a rescue mission," Finn said, "we're a bit tied up here with the whole not being blown to bits thing." "Priorities," Lilo said, sarcasm lacing her tone. "We really need to work on those." They were in a mess and they knew it. Xander was the heart of the crew, for better or worse, and without him they were like a ship without a compass, adrift and directionless. "Okay, focus," Erla said, taking charge. "First we stabilize the ship, then we get Xander. Assuming there's anything left to rescue," Finn added, ever the pessimist. Back in the alien stronghold, Xander found himself in front of a tribunal that looked like a bad acid trip. Eyes, tentacles, and appendages of every imaginable type focused on him, scrutinizing his every move. "And here I thought my high school principal was intimidating," Xander quipped, trying to keep his usual bravado intact. "You are responsible for the chaos that has ensued," an alien voice intoned, echoing through the chamber. It was a voice that brooked no argument, no denial. "Me, personally," Xander replied, feigning innocence with all the sincerity of a used car salesman. "I'm just a guy with a ship and a few too many buttons to press." "The Whimsy and its crew have disrupted the peace," the alien continued, its patience thinning visibly. "Your recklessness cannot go unpunished." "Look," Xander said, trying to sound reasonable. "If there's a fine, I'm happy to pay it, though you'll have to accept payments in weekly installments." The tribunal wasn't amused. The sentence, though he barely understood the details, sounded long and not particularly pleasant. As they led him away, Xander realized just how deep in the muck he'd ended up. Alone, outgunned, and outflanked by forces that didn't even register his existence as more than a nuisance. Back on the Whimsy, the crew was still in damage control mode. The ship, now a patchwork of temporary fixes and duct tape, was limping along. But without their captain, the spark that held them together was flickering. "We've got to do something," Lilo said, looking at her crewmates. We can't just leave him. Suggestions? Tinker asked, though he already seemed resigned. Erla considered their options, which were slim to none, but giving up wasn't in her nature. We need a distraction, something that gives us the edge even for a moment. Distraction, huh? Finn mused. Maybe we could blow something up. Subtle, Erla replied, but the idea was taking root. It might just work. Crazy plans are our specialty, Lilo added, nodding. With a semblance of a plan forming, they set to work. Meanwhile, Xander was trying his own method of escape, though his jokes and charm were bouncing off alien stoicism like rubber bullets on a tank. Not even a smile, he asked his guard as they marched him back to his cell. Tough crowd. The guard gave a grunt, whether in acknowledgement or derision, Xander couldn't tell. Back on the Whimsy, the crew concocted their distraction. A makeshift device rigged from spare parts and sheer desperation, aimed at freeing their captain. Let's just hope this doesn't blow us all up, Finn muttered as they prepared to engage their crazy plan. If it does, I get to say I told you so, Tinker replied, trying to stay optimistic in their own twisted way. As they executed their plan, somewhere deep inside the alien stronghold, alarms rang out. Xander, ever the opportunist, seized the moment amidst the chaos. Somehow in the confusion, he found himself free, dodging alien guards whose coordination was as haphazard as their own plan. Looks like my luck hasn't run out yet, he said to himself, sprinting down a corridor with all the grace of a startled deer. Back on the Whimsy, the crew had managed to divert attention long enough to slip past the rival faction's defenses, finally reaching the alien facility where Xander was held. They staged a rescue that was half daring, half sheer insane, but it worked. Reunited, Xander grinned at his crew. What took you so long? Traffic, Finn deadpanned, and for a moment there was a sense of normalcy amidst the madness. Let's get out of here, Erla said, ushering them back to the ship. Before they realize what incompetence has wrought. As the Whimsy made its escape, battered but not broken, Xander couldn't help but laugh. They'd survived another impossible mission, their usual blend of misfortune and miracle. Next time, Lilo said, as they left the Comet and its chaos behind, let's just take a vacation. Agreed, Xander said, still chuckling. But until then, let's keep flying. And with that, the Whimsy, despite all odds, continued on its erratic journey through the stars, a beacon of human tenacity, or perhaps just stubbornness, with a crew that was hopelessly, recklessly, indefatigably together. The Whimsy creaked like an old man's knees as it drifted near the Comet, its internal systems whining louder than a malfunctioning karaoke machine. Inside, the crew huddled around the makeshift briefing area, which was basically just the less wobbly part of the galley. The atmosphere was tense, like a funeral on payday. I'm not saying this is the worst plan we've ever had, Finn said, leaning back in his chair. But only because we once tried to outrun a supernova. That was technically Xander's idea, Erla pointed out, her hands full of schematics that looked like they were drawn by someone high on caffeine and ambition. Still counts, Finn replied, grinning like a shark that just heard a good joke. Quiet, children, Lilo snapped, looking over the plan with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for tax audits. We've got bigger fish to fry. Bigger fish. Tinker peered up from the mess of wires and blinking lights he'd been working on, squinting like a mole dragged into the sunshine. More like an entire sushi banquet. All right, Xander chimed in, rallying his scattered troops. What's the big idea? Lilo took a breath, clearly gearing up to sell them all on a plan that was as insane as it was desperate. We use the Comet's ancient tech to send a message proving humanity's worth. Tinker raised a skeptical eyebrow. Worth what? A discount on our next intergalactic screw-up. More like worth not getting obliterated by the Council, Lilo shot back. We show them we've got what it takes to not be cosmic nuisances. And you think some ancient alien mumbo-jumbo is going to impress them? Finn asked, his voice dripping with the kind of doubt usually reserved for miracle weight loss pills. Precisely, Lilo said, dead serious. We tap into the Comet's tech, amplify our intent, and send a message that even these uptight extraterrestrial bureaucrats can't ignore. Sounds risky, Xander mused, scratching his chin as if he had a beard worth pondering. But we're not exactly drowning in safer options. Risk is our middle name, Tinker said, soldering something that sparked alarmingly. Right after reckless, we need precise teamwork, Lilo continued, eyes scanning each crew member, daring them to flinch. And a bit of ingenuity. Ingenuity, Finn said, rubbing his temples. Last time we tried ingenuity, we nearly vented ourselves into space. Yeah, but this time we've got a secret weapon, Xander said, flashing his trademark charm, the kind that usually got them into trouble. And what's that? Erla asked, skepticism etched in every word. Desperation, Xander replied with a wink. It's amazing what you can achieve when the alternative is certain doom. So the crew set to work, each member falling into their roles with the kind of begrudging acceptance you'd expect from a group that had seen it all and somehow survived. Tinker and Lilo took charge of the technical aspects, their heads buried in wires and circuits that looked more complicated than a politician's tax returns. Finn and Erla were tasked with keeping the whimsy steady, a job that required equal parts skill and prayer. They worked in tandem, fingers flying over controls with the kind of precision usually reserved for heart surgeons or bomb diffusers. Remember, Erla said as she adjusted the ship's trajectory, if we screw this up, we're gonna be space dust. Space dust sounds peaceful, Finn said, not looking up, compared to the paperwork we'll face if we survive this. Meanwhile, Xander prepped his speech, pacing the confines of the bridge like a caged animal with a flair for the dramatic. We need to sound credible, like we've got our act together, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Good luck with that, Tinker muttered from his corner, sparks flying as he adjusted the jury-rigged equipment. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, they were ready. The Comet loomed outside the main viewport, an ancient giant that had seen more history than any one of them could comprehend, and now it would bear witness to another human gamble. All right, crew, Xander said, taking a deep breath. Let's remind the universe why humanity's either the best or worst thing to happen to space. Here goes nothing, Tinker said, flipping a switch that set the whole contraption humming with an ominous energy. There was a moment of tension, the kind that stretched tight like a rubber band, threatening to snap at any second. Tinker's device hummed louder, and the silence that followed was filled with the hopes and fears of the crew. Message sent, Lilo said, watching the console with an intensity usually reserved for cat videos at 3 a.m. Now we wait. The wait was excruciating, every second a reminder of how fragile their lives were, held together by little more than stubbornness, and a prayer to deities who probably had better things to do than watch over a bunch of reckless humans. How long do you think it'll take? Erla asked, eyeing the ancient comet they'd hijacked for their message. However long it takes for those council types to get off their many-eyed arses, Finn replied, leaning back in his seat as if daring the universe to surprise him. Then, almost impossibly, a response crackled through the ship's comm system, the voice of the council head dripping with disdain and alien superiority. Humanity dares to use our ancient technology. This is unprecedented. Xander leaned in, his voice calm but firm. Unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures. Besides, if you didn't want us using it, you should have put up a do not touch sign. Silence. The kind that could either precede laughter or an execution. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the council head spoke again, its voice laced with curiosity and, dare they hope, grudging respect. You show courage, if not wisdom. We will consider this. Gesture. The channel closed, leaving the crew staring at one another, disbelief mingling with tentative hope. Did that just happen? Finn asked, breaking the silence with the grace of a bull in a china shop. Either that or we're all hallucinating, Tinker said, still clutching a spanner like it was a holy relic. Well, Xander said, a grin spreading across his face. I guess we just pulled off a miracle. The mood in the room shifted, the tension lifting as if someone had cracked open a window in a smoke-filled bar. Laughter bubbled up, the kind that comes from relief and disbelief, echoing off the battered walls of the whimsy. "We might just get drinks after all," Erla said, her voice tinged with the kind of hope that dared to peek from behind the curtain of cynicism. "First round's on me," Xander promised, riding the high of success, however temporary. The crew set to work on the next steps, though what those steps were, none of them could say for sure. But for now, they'd done the impossible, and that was enough. As the whimsy set course for yet another uncertain destination, Xander couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. "So, what's next?" Lilo asked, already plotting their next move like a chess player with a fondness for chaos. "Next," Xander replied, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "We keep doing what we do best, flying by the seat of our pants and hoping the universe doesn't notice." And as the stars stretched out before them, the crew of the whimsy, battered and bruised, continued their journey. Not because they were heroes, or because they had anything resembling a plan, but because that's just what humanity does. The whimsy, that messy excuse for a spaceship, continued its janky journey around the comet. Inside, the crew buzzed with the kind of nervous energy you only get from jumping off a cliff and hoping there's a trampoline at the bottom. Lilo was in command central, or as they called it, the mess. "If we pull this off," Lilo said, looking over her haphazardly organized notes, "maybe they'll rename this comet after us." "Comet Dumbass," Finn called from the helm. "Has a nice ring to it." "Focus, people," Xander said, his voice the mock seriousness of a teacher who'd long given up on classroom control. "Remember, this is about saving humanity." "You know, no pressure." "Right, no pressure," Tinker mumbled from beneath a pile of wires like a depressed crab. "Only our continued existence in the galaxy. Easy peasy." Erla was adjusting one of the ship's few functioning screens, which was about as reliable as a weather forecast on a rainy day. "Finn, what's our status with that thing you call a trajectory?" "On course, more or less," Finn replied, fiddling with the controls like a kid with attention deficit. "Let's hope the universe is in a generous mood today." Lilo straightened, her gaze as sharp as a freshly sharpened knife. "All right, time to execute the plan." "Everyone ready?" "Born ready," Xander said, pulling on his captain persona like an old, reliable sweater. "And maybe a little bit more after." "Good," Lilo nodded. "Tinker, fire up the comet's tech. Finn and Erla, keep us steady. Xander, you're on speech duty. Make them think we're not just a bunch of hairless apes who accidentally stumbled into space." "Got it," Xander replied, his voice dripping with confidence. "Time to charm the pants off an alien council." "The council doesn't wear pants," Erla said, deadpan as a heart attack. "Then I'll charm whatever it is they wear," Xander shot back with a grin. The crew sprang into action, or rather, a sort of controlled chaos that was their version of action. Tinker poked and prodded at the comet's ancient tech until it started to hum with the low growl of a wolf waking from a nap. Erla and Finn worked the controls, trying to keep the whimsy from spinning out of control like a drunken figure skater. "Ready," Tinker called over the noise. "Get your speech face on, Captain." Xander took a deep breath, staring at the comm unit like it might bite him. "All right, here goes nothing." As Xander activated the comm, a holographic representation of the council head flickered into existence on the main screen. Its many eyes blinked with the synced precision of a well-oiled machine. "Human crew of the whimsy," it intoned, the kind of voice you'd expect from a deity debating whether to smite or spare. "Greetings, esteemed council," Xander began, his voice smoother than a greased pig at a county fair. "We, the humble crew of the whimsy, wish to extend our thanks for your patience." The council head's eyes narrowed, an impressive feat for something entirely holographic. "Your actions have been unorthodox." "Speak quickly." "Unorthodox is our middle name," Xander said with a smile that could sell ice to a snowman. "We just wanted to show you that humans bring a unique chaos to the cosmic party." "Chaos is not a virtue," the council head replied, its disdain thicker than planetary crust. "But it can be," Xander countered. Where others see disorder, we see opportunity for innovation, creativity, and, well, survival. Finn snorted quietly, muttering to Erla, charming the pants off my ass. This comet, Xander continued, gesturing grandly even though he knew the council couldn't see him, is a relic of a bygone era. We've turned it into a beacon of human tenacity, a distress signal, and a message of unity. Tinker tapped into the comet's ancient systems, amplifying the message through subspace channels. Lights flickered ominously, the ship groaned, but the tech held together barely. Remarkable, the council head said, its voice grudgingly impressed. Yet you risked much to send this signal. What drives your kind to such extremes? Hope, Xander replied, as if he wasn't one bad move from a nervous breakdown. And maybe a little bit of stubbornness. Mostly stubbornness, Erla whispered, earning a grin from Finn. The council head paused, its eyes a kaleidoscope of judgment. Your audacity has been noted. The council will consider your appeal. Xander held his breath, the kind of breath you hold when watching a pot of water that refuses to boil. When the silence stretched just a heartbeat too long, he exhaled. Thank you, he said, with all the sincerity he could muster, for considering the merits of our species. Do not mistake consideration for clemency, the council head warned, its voice a warning rumble. Wouldn't dream of it, Xander replied, his smile never faltering. The transmission ended, the hologram flickering out like an old CRT TV, leaving the crew in the familiar hum of failing systems and frayed nerves. So, Finn said, breaking the tension with his characteristic bluntness. Did we just survive that? Looks like it, Erla replied, her fingers still flying over the controls. For now. Nice speech, Cap, Tinker said, emerging from his nest of wires with a smirk. Almost had me convinced we weren't totally screwed. High praise, Xander replied, running a hand through his hair like a hero in one of those old dramas that always ended with a sunset. Lilo, who'd been silent, cleared her throat. Don't celebrate yet. We've still got to make sure our signal holds. Ah, the joys of living on the edge, Xander quipped, clapping a hand on Lilo's shoulder. Wouldn't have it any other way. As the reality of their minor victory sank in, the crew allowed themselves a moment of camaraderie, the kind that comes from knowing that, despite the odds, they'd managed to not get themselves vaporized. So, Erla said, eyeing the blinking lights on her console. What's the plan if the council decides we're more trouble than we're worth? Plan B, Tinker replied without missing a beat. Which is basically run fast and hope they have poor aim. Sounds solid, Finn said with a grin. Good thing we're experts at running. Xander looked at his crew, a mismatched bunch of misfits and rogues, and felt a surge of something like pride, though it could just as easily have been indigestion. They'd pulled off the impossible for now, and even if the future held more chaos, at least they were facing it together. All right, he said, with a decisiveness that suggested he actually knew what he was doing. Let's get the hell out of here before the council changes its mind. The whimsy shuddered as its engines fired up, protesting the abuse like an old man roused for a morning jog. But it moved, heading away from the comet and the scene of their latest near debacle. Where to next? Finn asked, his hands steady on the controls. Anywhere that isn't here, Xander replied. Preferably somewhere with a bar. Copy that, Erla said, punching in coordinates with the confidence of someone who didn't care where they ended up, as long as it wasn't in pieces. As the ship lumbered away, Xander leaned back in his seat, the adrenaline fading to leave room for exhaustion. You know, he said to no one in particular. I think we're going to be okay. Don't jinx it, Tinker warned, his voice half serious, half joking. We've just barely made it out of this mess. He's right, Lilo added, though there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. Save the celebrations for when we're not still potential glass stains on the universe. Xander chuckled, nodding in agreement. All right, all right. I'll save the optimism for when we're at least a few light years away. Good plan, Finn said, shooting Xander a thumbs up. Less chance of the universe hearing us and deciding to screw us over. The crew settled into their routine, each member returning to their posts, preparing for whatever the cosmos might throw at them next. They knew better than to think they were out of the woods. They weren't even sure there were woods in space. But for now, they'd done enough. As the stars stretched out before them, endless and indifferent, the Whimsy and her crew sailed into the unknown, fueled by hope, stubbornness, and just a touch of madness. In the end, maybe it was true what they'd said. Humanity was chaos incarnate, a force unto itself, and sometimes, just sometimes, that chaos was exactly what the universe needed. "Hey, Xander," Erla called, breaking the contemplative silence. "Yeah, think we can get the council to spring for a repair job on this heap?" Xander laughed, the sound echoing in the cramped quarters. "Let's not push our luck. But you know what they say, it's the thought that counts." And with that, the Whimsy continued its journey, a testament not to human perfection but to human persistence. They might not have had all the answers, or any of them really, but they had each other, and that was a start. The Whimsy's engines hummed with a sound suspiciously similar to a death rattle, but the crew had learned to take that particular noise in stride. Captain Xander Quirk sat back in his seat, a smirk stretching across his face like a cat who'd just pilfered the cream. "Well, I'll be damned," Finn said from the helm, adjusting their course with all the grace of a one-eyed drunk trying to parallel park. "We actually did it. The council lifted the ban. Never thought I'd see the day. Don't go getting all misty-eyed on me," Erla said, not bothering to look up from her screens. "We could still explode any minute. Always the optimist, Erla." Xander chuckled, the sound a low rumble like gravel in a can. "But for once, we've got a reason to celebrate." "Right. Celebrate now, panic later," Tinker said, emerging from his usual cluster of wires like a mole popping out of its hole to check the weather. "And by celebrate, I mean pray this bucket of bolts holds together." "I'll drink to that," Finn added, already rummaging for the flask he'd stashed somewhere under his console. "Assuming we're not drinking recycled piss." "Hey, it's only recycled twice," Xander joked, raising an imaginary glass. "To human resilience and our ability to make bad ideas work." The crew clinked their imaginary glasses, Erla rolling her eyes but unable to suppress a small grin. Against all odds, they'd convinced the Galactic Council, a group of beings with more eyes than a spider on steroids, that humanity wasn't just a cosmic nuisance. They were now officially allies, or, at the very least, not enemies. In the grand scheme of things, it was practically a marriage proposal. Lilo, ever the organized one, tapped away at her console. "Anyone else think it's hilarious we saved humanity with a bunch of ancient rock tech?" "Hey, if it works," Tinker shrugged, "who are we to complain? Besides, I think it adds a bit of charm to our cosmic chaos." "Charm," Finn snorted, his laughter like a bark. "That's one way to put it." Xander leaned forward, capturing the attention of his crew. "You know, we might just be the most dysfunctional crew out here, but we pulled it off. Each of us had a part to play, and we did it together." "Great. Now we can all hold hands and sing Kumbaya," Erla quipped, but her expression softened ever so slightly. "Maybe we should start with fixing the hunk of junk status of our ship," Lilo suggested, jotting down a list of potential repairs. "In case you didn't notice, we're still one sneeze away from turning into space confetti," repair fund from the council's pocket. Finn waggled his eyebrows with mock hope. "That'll be the day," Xander laughed, shaking his head. "But they've recognized our worth now. That's a start. The Comet's ritual site is a symbol of unity they can't ignore. And a great tourist attraction," Erla added dryly. "Come see the place where humanity pulled a miracle out of its collective ass." "Think they'll put up a plaque?" Finn asked, grinning. "If they do," Tinker said, crossing his arms, "it better say something about the maintenance guy who kept this ship from imploding." "Amen to that, brother," Xander chuckled, the crew sharing a moment of camaraderie that was as rare as it was genuine. As the Whimsy drifted further away from the comet and its newly minted historical significance, Xander took a moment to reflect. Not too long, of course. He wasn't about to get lost in some philosophical pit about the nature of humanity. But there was a sense of satisfaction, knowing they'd done something right. "All right," Erla interrupted his thoughts. Since we're not dead yet, what's the next move? Find a watering hole, Xander suggested. One with more booze than watered-down optimism. And maybe less risk of annihilation, Tinker added, fiddling with some wires that looked like they had given up on life. Now you're just getting picky, Finn chuckled. But I like the way you think, Xander's communicator buzzed, cutting through the banter like a knife through overcooked steak. Heads up, folks. Message from the council. The crew fell silent, their earlier levity replaced by a tense anticipation. It was like waiting for the results of a test you'd forgotten to study for. Xander opened the message, his expression shifting through a range of emotions like a bad actor in a silent film. Good news, he finally announced. Seems they've acknowledged us as valuable allies. That drew a round of skeptical chuckles from the crew. Valuable, Erla said, the word dripping with sarcasm, because nothing says reliable like a ship that's one bump away from spontaneous combustion. Hey, we've got character, Finn retorted. And if there's one thing the universe needs more of, it's character, right? Tinker nodded with a grin. Character building, remember. Exactly, Xander agreed, his eyes twinkling with mischief. And now that the council's realized we're the best kind of chaos, they can't help but keep us around. Best kind of chaos, Lilo repeated, shaking her head. There's a backhanded compliment if I ever heard one. As the crew joked, teased, and plotted their next move, Xander felt something unexpected. Hope, maybe. Or maybe just relief that they hadn't ended up as smears on the cosmic windshield. Either way, it was enough to keep him going. All right, crew, he announced, standing with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for speeches that involve saving the world, or at least a very small part of it. We came, we saw, we didn't die. Let's set a course for somewhere more entertaining. Preferably with a repair dock, Lilo said, still the voice of reason amid the chaos. And a decent bar, Finn added, always with his priorities straight. Xander grinned, confident once more. Let's see what the universe has in store for the most infamous crew in the galaxy. The whimsy rumbled as it changed course, the sound a familiar mantra of impending doom that somehow felt more like an old friend. As the stars stretched out before them, an endless sea of possibilities, the crew of the whimsy knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. With a little luck, a lot of stubbornness, and just enough insanity to keep things interesting. Hey, Captain, Erla called as the ship settled into a new heading. Think we'll ever get used to this whole valuable allies gig? Not a chance, Xander replied, his grin as wide as the galaxy. But that's half the fun. With that, the whimsy continued its journey, a testament not to perfection but persistence. In the end, maybe it was true what they'd said. Humanity was chaos incarnate, a force unto itself, and sometimes, just sometimes, that chaos was exactly what the universe needed. So, Finn said, breaking the contemplative silence, you think they'll ever make a movie about us? Only if they like stories about unlikely idiots and their improbable success, Erla replied. Then we're shoe-ins, Tinker added, his laughter echoing through the ship. Xander leaned back, watching his crew argue over who would play them in a hypothetical movie. He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. As long as they had each other, they'd never truly be alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. All right, team, he announced, cutting through the banter with a tone that was more captain than clown. Let's see if we can find some trouble worth getting into. Now you're talking, Finn said, adjusting their course with a flourish. The stars beckoned, each one a potential adventure or misadventure waiting to happen. And the whimsy, held together by equal parts duct tape and willpower, was more than ready to face whatever came next. Because in the grand, uncaring vastness of space, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey, the chaos, and the ragtag group of humans stubborn enough to believe they could make a difference. As the ship trundled onward, Xander couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not just in what they'd accomplished, but in who they were. Misfits, rogues, and rebels, all determined to leave their mark on the universe, however small or chaotic it might be. Captain, Lilo called, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Incoming message from the council, Xander sighed, rolling his eyes but motioning for her to put it through. What now? The familiar hologram of the council head appeared, its many eyes blinking with a rhythm that somehow managed to convey irritation. "Human crew of the Whimsy," it intoned, "your actions have been noted." "We aim to please," Xander replied, his charm cranked up to full blast. "Anything else we can do for our esteemed allies?" The council head's expression didn't change, but there was a pause that suggested it was considering its words carefully. "Continue to monitor your progress." With that, the hologram flickered out, leaving the crew in silence. "Well," Finn said, breaking the tension, "at least they're not calling us pests anymore." "Small victories," Erla agreed, returning to her screens. Xander chuckled, shaking his head. "Let's see how long we can keep it that way." With a shared sense of purpose and a healthy dose of irreverence, the Whimsy and her crew sailed into the unknown, fueled by hope, stubbornness, and just a touch of madness. In the end, they didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was a start.